Welcome back to the Resurgence Athletics Podcast. My name is Dr. Ryan Goodell.
And my name is Dr. Lucas Noguera.
And here we are, episode 13.
All right.
We're going to be talking about water and hydration and exercise today.
All the fun stuff.
Yeah, even though we're past the heat wave of summer here, it was a hot summer this year.
It was.
Yeah, a lot of 100-plus degree days.
Yeah.
Did you go for any runs in the
I
heat?
did, yeah. So this is definitely a podcast that I should be listening to.
Yeah, there were some hot runs this year, hot workouts outside, and water was a necessity.
Oh, yeah.
So we're going to be going over, some more information about water, hydration, specifically for sports and exercise.
Yep.
I think that can be something that's super beneficial to your performance, especially if you're an athlete and running especially, and has a massive effect on your performance. So if your hydration's not dialed in, you can really taper off, especially at the tail end of games, those make or break moments.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So we're dive into a bunch of questions on that. We're gonna talk about like why hydration is important during exercise, some of the main effects of dehydration, some environmental things like what can affect how much water you need to be drinking, and like what type of solution should you be drinking, because water might not necessarily be like pure water might not necessarily be what we need during a workout. We'll talk a little about sports drinks, and a bunch of other things. Let's dive into this here. Let's just, I guess, start with why is hydration so important during exercise?
Yeah, it's a big one.
Yeah.
I mean, right off the bat, it just helps maintain our blood volume. Like you said, it's going to maintain our muscle function, and it also is going to help to regulate our body temperature.
Yeah, blood volume is an interesting one because as we lose water, I think about piping, right?
Yeah.
Like the plumbing in the system, it can be full or it can start to get depleted. And it's like the water on a faucet, right?
Yeah.
So if like you're moving along, it's like hot out and you start to dehydrate, it's like turning the faucet a little lower.
Sure.
The heart's got to work a lot harder because you got to keep the flow rate going, right? So the heart's got to work harder as you start to get dehydrated. So that puts a little cardiac stress on you too, right? And your heart rate starts going up, starts elevating. Exertion gets a little harder.
Oxygen levels go down.
Oxygen levels. You need good blood volume to keep the things moving around. So, and then it also serves a function to regulate our body temperature, right? Like evaporation, perspiration, and the evaporation portion helps thermoregulate our bodies because if we get too hot, then that's not good for us. We don't like that. Our body's like that really narrow range of heat, right? So it's got a couple major effects, blood volume, body temperature, and muscle function, because all the enzymes and the reactions that happen in our body, they all need water to happen, right? It's like one of the main constituents of those reactions that help give us electrical nerve impulses and a whole variety of different physiological functions. But, so while we're exercising, if we do end up getting dehydrated, what are some of the main effects that we see of dehydration on the body? Like, what are some of the major signs that we start to see?
So like you said, anything cardiovascularly, right? Our heart rate is going to go up. It's going to be harder to breathe. You're going to see things of that nature occurring right off the bat, decrease in our performance overall. It's going to impair the body's temperature, so maybe more excessive sweating, things of that nature. And then as you start to lose all the body, sweating, as you start to lose that, you start to also become hyponatremic, so less sodium. So then those effects are going to be the more prominent ones, where you're going to have the nauseousness, the confusion, maybe more fatigue overall. And then possibly even, in more severe cases, even like seizures can occur from that side effect there.
Yeah. So that goes into the stages of heat stress
Yeah.
and then heat stroke and
Yeah.
then all those more severe problems that come along with that. And temperature regulation, a huge one for that. And then when we sweat, we also lose a little bit of like electrolyte
Yeah.
through that process. And electrolytes are those sodium, potassium, calcium, and things like that. And salt, super important
Yeah.
because all the nerve impulses and the little pumps in our cells, the sodium potassium pump,
Yeah.
those all help our cells maintain, homeostasis in their happy little environments. But when we sweat, we lose a lot of salt too. So it's not just water that we're losing when we're sweating. So that's kind of important to note because that gets into why we don't necessarily just want to drink water, right? When we're exercising, we do need to replenish some of those other things that we're losing at the same time. Some conditions that can change how much we sweat, we can talk a little bit about environmental considerations as well. So when we're exercising, what are some environmental things that we're looking at that can affect how quickly we sweat and how quickly we lose water?
Yeah. So right off the bat is temperature, right? So if you're in a place, Arizona versus New Jersey versus Massachusetts, depending on where you are, how hot it is, how hot the summer is, and then also the altitude, right? That's going to also have a big impact in, hydration levels and hydration needs.
And humidity as well, right? Like think about 90 degrees in Arizona compared to 90 degrees in like Florida or the Southeast. When you're out for a run, the humid conditions, you're going to sweat. It is way different. Sweat rate's kind of important because that's going to dictate how much we need to be drinking during that activity. And so how much sweat loss we're going to have is going to be a factor of time that you're exercising, but also the environmental conditions that you find yourself in and the intensity of the exercise too, right? So I just know from the American College of Sports Medicine, their recommended guidelines are, depending on the level of activity you're doing and the intensity, you should be wanting to drink anywhere between like 0.4 to 0.8 liters per hour during exercise, and that range is going to be based on how fast you sweat. Those are typical. Those are normal people sweat ranges. I've definitely met some people who can do a super intense workout, and you're like, "Why are you not sweating?" And then other people like stand up from a chair and they're like, "I'm dripping, I'm sweating," or they walk outside and you're like, "I am soaked." Right? So sweat rates are super variable between people. To get a better idea of what your sweat rate is. Sometimes with athletes, especially my runners, what I'll recommend doing is going out for either a 30 or 60-minute run and get a pre and post weight. That way you can start to figure out like, it was 80 degrees outside. I went outside for a 30-minute run. I weighed myself before, and then you come back after, you take off all your wet clothes because the sweat's on you still. And then you weigh yourself after. You can kind of get a better idea of what your specific sweat rate is. And how much you need to be consuming per like half hour or hour that you're exercising. Especially for the longer duration stuff too. You're looking like 45 minutes and beyond. We really need to start thinking about like, what are we consuming liquid wise when we're exercising, right?
Always good to have that baseline.
Right. And you don't want to necessarily drink just pure water, like we said before. You might want to have some type of sport or electrolyte drink, right? So just like what are some examples of those off the top of your head? Like,
so first one that comes to bat is my favorite, Gatorade.
Classic one is Gatorade.
Any of the electrolytes, the ones you can get at, any of your local pharmacies.
Yeah, and some people are adverse to those, but you could also do other things too. Some people make their own at home. Some people mix juice. Some people, take a little bit of like a chew or a gel, and then they drink water to supplement with that.
Coconut water is a great one too that I like using. Yeah,
that's a good one. And then there's a couple differences, like even if you talk about like electrolyte drinks, right? Like you're looking at hypotonic, isotonic, and hypertonic drinks. And those might be some new words for everybody out there. So we can kind of break those down a little bit. But within that class of like electrolyte drinks, right? Hypertonic solutions are beverages that are typically in like a higher concentration of dissolved particles. So that could be like sugars, salt, whatever is dissolved in the actual drink itself, right?
Yeah.
And then we also had isotonic beverages, which isotonic meaning similar to or the same, which is about the same osmolality of the body fluids. So if there's more electrolyte solution or salt, the water will attract towards it
Sure.
because it's trying to create equilibrium, right? So some people are familiar with the salt bloat, right?
Yeah.
So you drink a lot of electrolytes, a lot of salt, sodium's an electrolyte,
Yeah.
and it likes to hold on to water, right? So that's like kind of how we stay hydrated. And then we have hypotonic beverages, where like I guess examples of isotonic beverages would be like Gatorade, Powerade, and other sports drinks. That's kind of what they're going for with that. With some other things added in there, maybe specific electrolytes.
Sure.
And then with the hypotonic beverages, those are drinks that have like a lower concentration of dissolved particles. And so those are designed to hydrate people quickly.
Yeah.
And providing them with a little bit of energy. So normally there's like a sugar or something in there. An example of that would be like a low sugar sports drink, which would be like a Powerade Zero, potentially, or like a diluted fruit juice. Some people do like a 50 and 50. If they don't like some people don't like artificial colorings and things and like their drinks and stuff like that. So they'll dilute a fruit juice. But those things have a lower concentration of dissolved stuff in there. So it's more diluted drinks. You can think of it that way. And each one of those has different uses for different times, right? So the hypertonic beverages, those are typically consumed like after an exercise. So, you hear some athletes drinking like soda, which is super hypertonic beverage because of the high fructose corn syrup. That's just sugar directly back into the muscles, replenish the glycogen stores, right? And then with like isotonic beverages, you're probably looking at something like more of like a high intensity activity that you need a little bit more like sugar or some energy in there. And then a hypotonic beverage with lower concentration, probably a longer duration activity, something long distance running, and stuff like that. So depending on the type of activity, the drink that you're drinking might need to be a little different. And so that comes with problem solving and troubleshooting for your specific situation. So that's kind of the lay of the land with different types of beverages, and how those can be used in different scenarios. But how can athletes, estimate their sweat rate to tailor that hydration plan for them?
Yeah, so I think a big thing, even like if I go out for a run and it's like a hot summer day, I try to weigh myself right beforehand. And then when I get back, I weigh myself afterwards and see how much weight was lost, because I know that that's just what I need to replenish, right? So we talked about that a little earlier.
Yeah.
Just address and account for that.
It's typically like a 1-to-1 ratio, or maybe even a little bit higher than that. It's not an exact science by any means, but, if you lose, some people think in kilogram would be like equivalent to like 1 liter of water. And if you lose a pound on the scale, that's equivalent to 16 ounces of water. So you have some variability there.
Sure.
But yeah, you're looking to replenish pretty much whatever you lost during the exercise. So that pre and post weight measurement is really important. And then I think one thing to highlight is this condition that we see when people only drink water during exercise. Like some people are like, oh, I don't like the idea of having to drink like carbs or like something when I'm exercising.
Sure.
But those do serve a specific purpose. Yeah. And if you're only drinking plain water, that can lead to a condition called hyponatremia.
Yeah.
And you want to explain a little more about how that goes down?
Sure. I mean, we can jump into it, but basically, you know, if water follows sodium, right? So if you're sweating all this water out, you're also losing some of that sodium in the body, which then can have drastic effects like nauseousness. You can feel very fatigued. Obviously, your performance will go down. Even in like more dramatic, severe cases, you can even like suffer from seizure. I've heard of that before in the past. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's taking out some of those electrolytes. When we're sweating, we're losing that sodium, and our bodies need that to send nerve impulses and keep our heart functioning, and a lot of really important things. And when we have the water intake, if things want to move from high concentration to low concentration, and we're only ingesting water, we're not creating a diffusion gradient, and it can actually take away from the things we need in our body and cause more non-homeostasis conditions, right? And so, you know, if we're looking to develop a good strategy while we're playing a sport or running or whatever the activity is, it is a good idea to have a hydration plan. That's something that I know I've talked about with my athletes a ton, especially some of the runners. I mean, we just had the New York City Marathon. So, you know, especially for a long duration activity like that, where it's hours and hours, you need to have a strategy to take in hydration, because you can run into some trouble if you don't, especially if environmental conditions are different, duration of activity, the intensity of the activity, the humidity that day. Having pre-planned that and thought about those things prior to the event is super important.
How early would you say is, you know, the appropriate timing to start that hydration plan? So how soon before the event should athletes be looking into this?
Yeah, I mean, you should ideally be doing that throughout the entirety of your training cycle.
Yeah.
That way you can dial it in depending on, you know, what distances you're running that day, different environmental conditions. Like, let's just take a runner, for example. Every day is not going to be the same. Some days are going to be more humid, hotter. So with the change in conditions, that's your time to experiment a little. That's the time to make your errors and figure out how you're going to respond to things, and then dial it in the closer you get towards the competition day. And then that's going to put you in a better position to succeed. Right? You're just trying to decrease your margin of error when you're out there on competition day. Like, margin of error is to be expected because not everybody's perfect. But the better tuned into our bodies we can be, and to know the variables that need to be adjusted depending on the conditions of that day. Like watching what the weather is going to be that day. Weather forecasts, also super important for athletics. Like even in different sports, like I think about like baseball or even soccer and things like that. Things change depending on what the weather is going to be like. They
100%.
literally have data on how well like baseball players hit day versus night games. Temperature probably even nowadays. Like there's so many things that factor in, and hydration is just one of those. Right. So, I mean, that kind of summarizes the whole thing, right? Like hydration plays a huge effect on our health, our performance, our recovery, and having good strategies that are personalized for you based on, you know, everybody's different. Our sweat rates are all different, is going to be one of the probably the more important things you can do for yourself, I would say, and figuring out, you know, what's your hydration plan. It's going to be different than your friends. So you can't just be stealing their drinks out there and then you're throwing them under the bus because you drank all their their electrolytes. So, you know, you want to stay hydrated. You want a good pre-game plan. How much do you need to take in prior? You know, sipping on something regularly during exercise, especially prolonged exercise, and then having a rehydrating plan like after the activity to make sure you're replenishing and getting like a good recovery. Those are all good things to have planned out in your head, especially if you're trying to compete at a higher level athletics. anything you want to add there?
No, I mean, drink your water. you know?
Drink water. You drink plenty of water. You're like a
I drink.
fish.
I drink too much
I do
water. I
not.
might be overhydrated.
I do not drink enough water. I could probably do a little bit better in that department.
But yeah, no, in all seriousness, just I think being in tune with your body, right? Knowing what your body needs. We all need water. Make sure that you're staying hydrated, and especially tailoring it to what your needs are. Like your sweat rates, like you mentioned, temperature, and just how long you're out there doing the exercise that you're doing.
That kind of brings us to the end of this episode. So if you liked this, like, comment, share, subscribe, click all the buttons everywhere. And our sponsor for today's episode again is Gus, Resurgence Physical Therapy. So if you're in the New Jersey area and need some physical therapy care, feel free to reach out to us. And we will see you next time.